All right, welcome guys. Today we'll be looking at the pelvis and perineum. So I'm going to start right with our content sheets. I know you guys have your lab exam this week Thursday, so I wanted to get it out in a speedily fashion. I did do it a little bit late, but I'm getting it out to you guys now. So I hope this is a helpful resource. Again, go to all of the office hours. Please make sure you go. This is just another resource to help you make that knowledge more foundational, right? To give you another resource to see the knowledge that you're learning in these places from a different viewpoint. So, in saying that, we're going to start right with the pelvis and perineum, looking at the organs for the second page of the Unit 5 structure list. All right. So, right here we have a female, right? This is a female 3D rendering, right? Because we can see the uterus right here, right? But let's start off going over the organs. So, the first organ we have is the bladder, right? So I remove this. This is our bladder. We can see this is the bladder because if I press the ureter in the back and then press the renal pelvis and the kidney, right, they all combine to be one, right? So if I press examine, right, you can see the kidney, right? You can see the renal pelvis that drains to the ureter, which goes to the urinary bladder. Um, Also, if I remove myself from examine and I go and look at the inferior end of the perineum, you can also see one, right, the anus or the rectum here, right? So this is the rectum. You can also see the vagina here, and then you can also see the urethra, right? So urethra, vagina, rectum, right? That is the ordering, right? When you're looking at the inferior pelvic region. Okay. Now let's move on because you don't quite have anal canal. I would just know that your sigmoid colon turns into your rectum, and your rectum turns into your anal canal. I can go look for a better image of that, but I don't think. Well, I guess yeah. So, right, so we go from our rectum inside here, and then your anal canal, right? So as you go further down, you have your anal canal. There might be an image later on when we look at the dissections, but we'll stop it for there because we have a bit to get to. But the next muscles that we'll look at are iliacus, right? Iliacus, right? This muscle right on top of the ilium, iliacus, right? You see this muscle right here, it's iliacus. And then going through the greater sciatic notch, right? We have piriformis. I'm gonna flip it over to the posterior just for us to be able to see that better, but that is piriformis. Right, so I flip it over here, we see greater sciatic notch, piriformis. And also from the lesser, we see obturator internus. So this is obturator internus. So if I were to flip this over here, get a better viewing from the anterior, right? If I were to remove this obturator fascia, ooh, let me go back. There we go. Okay, perfect. Okay. So we see, right, the obturator internus. You see it coming all the way around and covering the obturator foramen, right? So if I were to remove this, I literally see the obturator foramen right here, right? So this is the obturator foramen. You can see the obturator artery, right, being here. This is just one of the branches that are going through the obturator foramen, through the obturator internus, but I'm going to show you guys a better image of that. But this is just one artery they left here. But I'm going to go back here, right? So we see obturator internus. And then we have a couple other pelvic muscles that we can see as well. So I'm going to remove some of this fascia here, right? And I'm going to remove the uterus, right, just so we can see the bottom of the pelvic floor. There's a lot of different things to remove. Oh my goodness. But we'll get there eventually, I guess. Okay, we're almost there. There we go. Okay, right. So, right, we just said that this was our obturator internus, right? Mm. So if this is our obturator internus, this has to be our coccygeus, right? Coccygeus is when you see it in the lab, it'll be that muscle with that little white film, right? That white bright film over it, right? We can know that's coccygeus. And then lower that, right? The muscle that's raising the rectum, we have levator ani, right? Right. This is all levator ani. If I were to click on it, right? This is levator ani. So I'm gonna press both of them just so that we can see the extent of all of the muscles. Right, so that would be levator ani, right? So these are the two muscles that are holding up the pelvic floor. If I were to just examine here, right, you can see the extent, right? So levator ani is literally raising the rectum, right? Some people say anus for trying to remember the spelling in the term, but it's raising the rectum. Right, these are two muscles that are holding up the pelvic floor, right? Holding up all the pelvic organs that are in the pelvis and perineum. Um, all right. Now that we see that, we can move on. So now that we have the muscles, we can move on to the egg producing system. Let's give me a second to get a better image and then we can continue. All right, now that we have a good image of the pelvis here, right? We can move on, right? So we can move on to the egg producing system. So the first two things that I want to go over are the round and rod ligament, right? These are supports for all of the female structures, right? So we have the uterus, we have the ovaries, the fallopian tube, the fimbria, right? The broad ligament is supporting all of these structures, right? So that's all the broad ligament, right? So all the things I just removed, that was the broad ligament, right? We don't need to know that, don't worry. And then from there, we also have the round ligament, right? So that would be these structures right here, round ligament, right? Supports, right? So if I hide those, right? So we can remove those, we no longer see those, and then we can start talking about, right, the uterus, right? So we don't have any, the uterus is not seen, right, in any of the donors because they had a partial or a total hysterectomy. So don't worry about that, but I still want to show you guys what it is and what it looks like. All right, so we have our uterus right here, right? So this is our uterus, right? So if I were to inspect that, right, uterus, right? You can still see it on the cross section, so it is important. So our uterus, right? So and then from our uterus we see the fundus, right? So on top of the uterus, so remember fundus of the stomach, fundus of the uterus, right? So the fundus is just the highest point of the tip of it, right? So we have the fundus of the uterus, and then we have the uterine tube, the oviduct, or the fallopian tube. And that would be this structure right here, right? So right, so this would be our oviduct, fallopian tube, or uterine tube, right? And then from there we have our ovary, right? So this would be our ovary, right? Ovary, and then we have our fimbriae or fimbria. So now that we have all of those structures and we can see them clearly, let's move on to the cervix, right? So We know that we can't see most of these structures in the donor, so don't worry about them. I just want to give you guys an understanding of where they are so you guys can see them at least here. All right, so we're removing our uterus, remove the fundus, remove the uterus. Now that we have the cervix, right? So we have the cervix here. Remember I talked about how we have the urethra, vagina, and then we have the anus, right? Or the rectum. So if I remove the vagina here, right? So this would be vagina or vaginal canal right here. If I were to remove that, right, I can see the cervix, right? Right, I can, but yeah. So I just removed the cervix, right? So I can bring it back just so we can see. Uterus, cervix, right? So I pressed cervix, right? You can see it right there, right? Right after the vagina, you see the cervix. All right, so now that we see that, right, you know, it goes vaginal canal, vagina, you go to cervix, then you go to uterus, right? So that is the pathway. But for now, I think that's all I'll show you guys, and then the last structure I'll show is the glands of the clitoris. But let me bring back the full, yeah, the full structure, right? The full, and then now, right, we see glands of the clitoris is right there. Glands of the clitoris, right here. Inspect, you see it right there, and I didn't do that for the vagina. So let me inspect that, right? Examine, right? We see it, right? That's the vagina. You can literally see the cervix here, and then you can see the uterus. But I'll press on that as well, just so we can see that. All right, the cervix. All right, so we see the uterus, we see the cervix, and then you see the uterus. So we see the vagina, we see the uterus on top, and we see the cervix in the middle. Right, makes sense. We see the connection point to the oviduct uterine tube right here. All right, now that we have that down, we're going to move on to some vasculature, nerves, all right, and arteries and veins. So let's go do that now. All right, now that we're here, we can actually see the vasculature, right? So let's start with the first one, the sciatic nerve. So I know I didn't go over the sperm producing system, but we'll go over that last. And then we'll go over nerves and vasculature now because we're in the female 3D rendering. So I would have to leave this one and then go to the male. So we'll just do the vasculature first. So the first structure we need to know is the sciatic nerve, right? That's just this big nerve in the back, right? It's going through the greater sciatic notch, right? Along with piriformis, right? You can see it going directly under piriformis, right? Sciatic nerve, right? We see it's a major convergence of the lumbosacral plexus, right? Right. So you see sciatic nerve right here, right? So we can see it, right, from the anterior and from the posterior. And then we also have femoral nerve, right? That would be this nerve right here, right? Femoral nerve, right? So, right, sciatic from the back, femoral nerve, sciatic nerve posterior, femoral nerve anterior. And then we can also see a couple of other nerves as well. Obturator nerve, right? We see the obturator foramen, which is right here, right? We see obturator internus, right, on top of the obturator foramen, right? This would be our pubis right here, right? So if I remove some of this fascia here, right, this obturator fascia, right, I can literally see the obturator nerve, obturator artery is in the back here, It's trying to hide a little bit. Alright, but obturator nerve, obturator artery, obturator vein. Ooh, I think I just removed the nerve by accident. Let me get that back. Okay, so we see obturator nerve, obturator artery is hiding a little bit there. There we go. And then obturator vein. Right, so we can see all of those if I examine. Right, we see all of them going to the obturator foramen right here. If I remove myself from examine and just inspect, right, we can see that. And then I'm going to remove all those selections just so we can actually see it going through the foramen. So let's hide that. I'm gonna actually click on the hip bone, right? And then the three vasculature structures, or the three vasculature and nerve structures. Right. So examine, right? We can literally see the bundle going through the obturator foramen, right? Makes sense. And one thing to note is where these arteries and veins are coming from, right? So this is the obturator vein. We see the external iliac, right? Right, so we see it coming from the external iliac vein, right? Similar to the obturator artery, right? Where's the obturator artery? It's right here. Ooh, let me remove some things here. That's our nerve. Right, we see our nerve coming from our internal iliac artery, right? So just make sure that we know where these nerves, these arteries, and these veins are coming from, just so we can identify them a little bit better. All right, so now that we have our obturator artery and vein that we identified, we're going to look at our internal pudendal artery and vein, right? So pudendal, right? Remember, we're looking for the internal, right? So first look for the internal iliac artery, right? Because the pudendal comes off of that, and then right in the back here, look for the middle one, right there, right? So that's so coming from our internal iliac artery, right? We see our internal pudendal artery, right? Internal pudendal artery, and then we need to find the vein. So so look for something similar, right? So vein, right? Vein and artery running with each other, right? So coming off the internal iliac artery, right? I can find my pudendal artery here, right? Internal pudendal artery. And so internal iliac artery, right? Converges and branches to form our internal pudendal artery, right? Very similar with the internal pudendal vein, which is running right alongside the internal pudendal artery, right? And they're both coming from the internal iliac vein and internal iliac artery. So now that we have those, let me just find that pathway just for you guys to see that. It's a little bit, yeah, there we go. So you can see it better, right? So you can see coming from the internal iliac vein, you can see internal pudendal artery. Internal pudendal vein, sorry, coming from that, right? Internal pudendal vein, and then internal pudendal artery, right? So internal pudendal artery coming from internal iliac vein, internal iliac artery, sorry, and then internal pudendal vein coming from internal iliac vein. So internal pudendal artery coming from internal iliac artery, internal pudendal vein coming from internal iliac vein. Finally got it right. Oh my goodness. A lot of words, but we got it. So now that we have that, right? We have that. Now we're going to move on to looking for internal pudendal nerve. So we have that. So, right, we can only see that on the outside for the structures that we're looking at, right? So that are, and they're traveling down to the perineum. Let's remove this. So let me try to find it here. Let me actually search for it because I did not identify this previously, but let me search for it. Pudendal nerve, right, left. Okay, right. So we can see. Okay, there it is. I'm just gonna go on this side just so we can see it better. But this is our pudendal nerve right here. And I'm trying to see if I could find it on this side, but it might be intertwined with the fascia here. Superior gluteal nerve. There we go. Okay. That's why I couldn't see because of piriformis. But right, that's our pudendal nerve, right? We can literally see it going towards the perineum. Oh my goodness, I just removed it. Okay. Okay. That's our pudendal nerve. I'm trying to remove all the other structure so we can better see everything that it's surrounding, right? So that's our pudendal nerve, our pudendal nerve. Right, so our pudendal nerve, right, it's right here. It splits, right, and it innervates, right, a bunch of these structures of the perineum, right? It's coming down towards the perineum. Right, so that's our pudendal nerve. Right, but we can't really see the pudendal nerve in any of the donors. We can see it in the plastinated pelvis, but I wouldn't worry about it in the donors. Now that we have that done, we're going to move on to the last part, which is the sperm producing system, and then we can continue on with that, and that'll be it. All right. Now that we're here, we're going to be looking at the sperm producing system, starting first with the testes. So we're looking at the scrotum here. So if I remove the scrotum, right, and I remove this septum, right, this fascia here, right, keep removing this fascia. A lot of fascia. We can tell that much, right? But here are the testes, right? Right. And of course, there would be two of them, but we only see one, right? Because this is a bisected, right? This is a bisected pelvis and perineum. All right, so testis. Coming from the testis, we have the epididymis. Right, so epididymis would be directly on the back of the testis here. So epididymis. Right, our epididymis turns into our vas deferens or our ductus deferens. So try to fix that. Okay, there we go. Testis. You have our epididymis, which turns into our ductus deferens. Right, all you see how the so if I were to remove the ductus deferens, click on it one more time, you see how it goes all the way to the prostate, all the way to the prostate. So, right, examine. Right, so we see our testis, epididymis. So testis, epididymis, and then ductus deferens goes all the way right to the prostate. Right, so we see that. See it goes, and we can also see it going through the spermatic cord, right? from the spermatic cord, it goes back to the prostate. But now that we see all of those things, we can also see the seminal gland or the seminal vesicle right there, right? So that's entering the prostate as well, right? And this is our prostate. So if I were to hide that, oop, let me get them back just so, right? So we saw all those things. Now we're just gonna start here, just to make it easier. Right, so if I remove my prostate, right? You can't. If I remove, me to zoom in. Via the convergence of the seminal vesicle and the ductus deferens, we can see the ejaculatory duct, right? And then we can see the urethra. This would be the prostatic urethra. This would be the urinary bladder, right? So if I remove the urinary bladder, right, get that back, right? So urinary bladder, right? Right. Then we go from urinary bladder to prostatic urethra. We see the convergence of the ductus deferens and the seminal vesicles to form the ejaculatory duct, which go into the prostatic urethra, right? And then now, from the prostatic urethra, the membranous urethra, and then we go all the way from the membranous urethra to the penile urethra. So we have that. And now if I get back everything, all right, so we have our prostate. If I remove the prostate, we have our prostatic urethra. Urethra prostatic part, same thing. I showed you the ejaculatory duct. We don't see that on the donors, so we don't see the ejaculatory duct. We also do not see the seminal vesicle very well, so it won't be pinned, so don't worry about that structure as well. So I would only worry about testis, epididymis, ductus deferens, prostate gland, prostatic urethra, penile urethra, corpus cavernosum and spongiosum, and then the glands of penis and prepuce. So glands of penis and prepuce. I would only worry about those structures that I just mentioned. So now that we have the prostatic urethra here, we saw the ejaculatory duct. We're going to move into the penile urethra after the membranous part. So this is the membranous part, and then we're going to move all the way into the penile urethra, right? So I'm going to remove this fascia here. I'm going to see if I can. All right, so if I remove the fascia here, I can see the corpus spongiosum, right? Move this fascia here. I can see the corpus cavernosum. Right, so before we go into the part of the urethra, I'm not sure if I can see it if I don't remove the yeah, if I don't remove the cavernosum, I can't see it. And the spongiosum, okay? But we might as well talk about that first, and then we'll move into penile urethra. But right, so I always remember when you're walking into a cave, right? You see the border of the cave when you look up. So cavernosum, right? So corpus cavernosum is on the top, two, right? And then you see corpus spongiosum on the bottom, right? If you throw a sponge in the sink, right? It's in the bottom of the sink, corpus spongiosum. Right? So now that we've gone over those, I just want to show us that we go from the prostatic urethra to the membranous urethra, and then we go from there to the penile or the spongy urethra, right? And from there, we have the glands of the penis, right? After there, right? So the glands of the penis is the head, right? But the prepuce is the foreskin, right? The foreskin, right? Otherwise known as foreskin, prepuce, head of the penis, glands of the penis. Right? I'm not sure if this is showing prepuce. I can check and see, but I don't think so now. So, but yeah. So what I'll do is to get the whole structure back, just so we can see what cavernosum and corpus cavernosum and corpus spongiosum look like when they're examined. So if I examine, right, corpus cavernosum. So we see corpus cavernosum on the top. Corpus cavernosum. Remember, spell it cavernosum. Don't spell it cavernosa, um, because that's how we're actually going to spell it. But and then corpus spongiosum on the bottom, right? Pretty sure cavernosa is just denoting that there's two individual ones, right? So but we have corpus spongiosum, corpus cavernosum, right? And then we also see the glands of the penis, right? Remember, we can also see prepuce, that foreskin inside of the donors, but it's not seen here. And then from there, I'm going to go to examine, just so we can see the different urethra. So if I remove all those structures, right, we can see, right, we can see the penile or spongy urethra. We can see the membranous urethra, right? So, right, and then from there, we can also see the prostatic urethra. If I move the prostate, we can also see our prostatic urethra, right? And we can see the ejaculatory duct right inside of the prostatic urethra, right? And then we can see the convergence of the seminal vesicle and the ductus deferens. So if I press on ductus deferens, right, we can see the ductus deferens going all the way to the scrotum, right? So if I remove this part of the scrotum, you can literally see your ductus deferens, right? Right, going all the way through the inguinal canal, then the spermatic cord. You can see it, right, turning into the epididymis, right, and then connecting directly to the testis. So for this week, that is all. I hope this was a help to you guys. Good luck on your exams. And have a good rest of your week, guys.